Today, the Pope and forgiving abortion, burying the dawn of an organized crime family, and when prayer can become superstition. This on today's Free Range Q&A with Al Kresta. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. I am Nick Tom along with Al Kresta. This is Free Range Q&A with Al Kresta. We're taking your comments and questions from Facebook, Twitter, and email. Let's get started. We've got Kelly on Facebook who says, Pope Francis has said that women who have had an abortion can receive absolution directly from a priest during this upcoming Jubilee year. I know many post-abortive women who have confessed to a priest and never went to the bishop. Are their sins actually forgiven?
It's a great question.
It is.
One that I'm sure many women are asking in America.
And they probably wouldn't have asked it until about 2 days ago.
Exactly. It's where pastoral practice and canon law sometimes go in collision. But here, what Pope Francis has done is actually clear something up in canon law that I think many people were unaware of. You're absolutely right. Most women in America who have had abortions, Catholic women, didn't realize that they had incurred an automatic excommunication. And that's what some people have said. But then you say, well, so what? Can't they just go to the priest and confess their sin and have that sin absolved? Here's the trick. If you've incurred automatic excommunication, you can't participate in any of the sacraments. So what do? You can't even go to the sacrament of reconciliation. So the question then is, well, who can possibly remit that excommunication? Well, it's only the bishop who can do that. Right. Now you say, that seems awfully harsh. Well, yeah, in a country like the United States of America, in the 20th and 21st century, where abortion has been so common, it probably puts an undue burden on women. But the 1983 Code of Canon Law actually has a number of conditions which prevent the excommunication from taking effect. For instance, the excommunication would not take effect for girls under the age of 16. It would not take effect for women who have had abortions because of grave or significant fear, or even grave or significant inconvenience, which would require a little more explanation. We don't have time for it. But also ignorance. In other words, if you were unaware of the penalty the abortion incurred, then you're probably not subject to the excommunication. Well, this means that most women probably aren't required to go to a bishop to be released from this excommunication, because they probably would fall into some of those conditions. Plus, you also have the fact that most bishops in America, apparently, have delegated the power to forgive and absolve for abortion. So I would say what Pope Francis is doing here is, in this year of Jubilee, he wants to make sure that everybody knows that as far as the sin, as deep as the sin goes, so deep goes God's mercy. And I suspect that's what's behind this, even though it may appear right now, especially for Americans, a little confusing. Around the rest of the world, maybe they are aware that excommunication is automatically incurred if you procure an abortion, especially under the older Code of Canon Law.
A lot of things are happening with this Jubilee Year of Mercy, and well, I'm sure things will come up on the program as well as here on Free Range. So we'll definitely keep on top of it. Another question also from Facebook, from Les. He says, in another thread, someone commented that a Mafia hitman could be absolved by a priest, unlike those involved in abortion who had to go to the bishop. Is it true that the hitman does not need to go to the bishop?
Well, this is actually another interesting question, and I suspect that he has in mind the reports of this alleged mafia figure Vittorio Casamonica, I
Yes.
think was his name.
It was quite a funeral.
It was in Rome. I hope we can get some pictures up on this. The horse-drawn carriage. They had the band playing the Godfather theme. They had a low-flying helicopter that dropped rose petals, and they put up banners outside the church. One of which said, "You are king," and King of Rome. And it showed this fellow, Vittorio Casamonica, with the Colosseum in St. Peter's on the same banner. And I think one of the signs actually said, "You've conquered Rome. Now you'll conquer paradise." Now, I don't think Catholic teaching really has that in mind here.
I don't think so.
Well, here's the situation. A priest is responsible for the building and for the funeral itself, conducting the funeral itself. He assures us that this was a sober funeral that he performed for a man who was a practicing Catholic, apparently. And, well, what about the signs on the side of the church building? He actually had the people take those down. But he doesn't have control over ostentatious displays of wealth or these kind of extravagant displays of family or colleague affection that he saw out there. This gained a lot of notoriety, too, because that same church, just back in, I think, 2006, refused to conduct a funeral for the father of the Right to Die movement in Italy. What was his name? Pier Giorgio Welby was his name. So his secularist friends actually conducted a funeral outside the church. The church would have nothing to do with it. Now, this is in accord with the canon law. I think it's 1184, which says that manifest sinners should be refused a funeral if, in fact, it will cause public scandal among the faithful. And so I think that's what was applied in the case of Pier Giorgio Welby. But I have no idea what the story is with this alleged Mafia member. I don't know how well he was known. I mean, it looks by the displays outside the church that he was pretty well known. But what about this? What about if on his deathbed he confessed to the priest and repented of his Mafia activity? Well, what then? What is a priest to do? A priest is to conduct a funeral. And the priest can't, priest can't control what's going on outside the church. And if this fellow repented and received absolution, he died in the grace of God. And his colleagues and his family apparently didn't get the memo.
This will probably lend itself to questions about Canon 915, which we talk about frequently when it comes to scandal by primarily Catholic politicians who are abortion supporters. So maybe we'll get a question on that and be able to delve into that question on Canon 915.
And it is a good question.
And it's a great exercise to be able to work through it. Here's another one. On the show recently, we talked about the question of some pious prayers that can become superstition if you're not.
This was the Pieta prayer book.
Yes,
in
Pieta,
particular.
Yep, that came up, and we had some responses to that. Peter in Omaha said, "I use the Pieta prayer book. The prayers in it are beautiful. Nobody I know uses the prayers solely for the promises. How dare you condemn the prayer book?" We also heard from Mary in Dearborn, who said, "Al, we have to be careful that it doesn't become superstition. I'm a convert, and I've wondered about that myself."
Yes, this is always a delicate area, because the church is very strong in its condemnation of superstition and credulity. It gets in the way of the proclamation of the gospel. It contributes to the skeptic storyline that Catholicism opposes faith and reason. So that's why it's important to keep this in mind. Also, many people use the Pieta prayer book. Now, one of the problems of doing a live radio program is that people tune in at different times and they often miss what was said. Even before we took up the question of the Pieta prayer book, I got into the depth of it. I said, look, people find these prayers beautiful and lovely. There's nothing wrong with the prayers themselves. The problem comes with the promises that are attached. And in fact, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, back in January of 1954, actually commented on this and said that these promises are not to be received as of supernatural origin, and that priests, bishops should not be publishing the book. So that's what we have from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. If that's the case, then I think I'm on pretty solid ground here. So all I can say is there is a distinction to be made between the prayers and any promises that are attached to them. They're not the same. They're not the same thing.
Yeah.
I think also it's important to keep in mind that we're living in an age in which the false story is out there that the Catholic Church despises reason. That's crazy. The Catholic Church is the organization that actually has doctrinal and dogmatic assessments of the use of reason. Yeah. Vatican I, in fact, even mentions that we can argue to the existence of God using natural human reason. So of all Christian traditions, the Catholic Church is the one that has the highest and most developed understanding of the relationship between faith and reason. St. Thomas Aquinas is considered the great master of the synthesis of faith and reason. So it's especially vexing and also damaging when we believe in superstitious promises. I think that when somebody gives you an absolute promise that if you engage in this little ritual here, and then you will have this prayer fulfilled over here, you are either in superstition or credulity or very, very, very close to it. Now, I'm not talking here about daily rosary. I'm not talking about Eucharistic adoration. I'm not talking about the use of sacramentals. I'm a lay Dominican. We wear the scapular. In my case, the white scapular. But what we have to keep in mind is that even in the use of sacramentals, and my home is full of them, we don't want to be looking like we're walking around like a religious goods store. That doesn't draw attention to Christ. It draws attention to our religious eccentricities. Yeah. So let me just say, I'm glad to talk about this all the time. I definitely am not discouraging use of the prayers. I'm saying we have to keep in mind how we live. And our entire life is supposed to be a living epistle. And so it does make a difference how the world reads that epistle. So keep in mind that we want to be champions of reason as well as faith.
Absolutely. And we have time for one more question, Al, and it's an easy. I hope it's an easy one. Otherwise, we got a problem here. Jack in Naples, can you recommend a one-volume work of Catholicism and America?
Well, let me say there are two works I'll recommend here. One, both by Ann Carroll. Now, this is not specifically a history of the Catholic Church in America, but Ann's book, Christ the King, Lord of History, is a Catholic look at world history from ancient times to modern times. And then she's also written Christ in the Americas, which is a look at, again, Catholicism in the New World. And I think both of those books are good reading, and they're not in any way overly academic. They're good popular reading. I enjoy them myself.
Well, Jack, I guess you got two for the price of one on that one.
That's right.
Okay, that's all the time we have for taking the questions. You mentioned last week that we were going to discuss some of the issues involving end times prophecies that have been popping up. Any word on that? Yeah.
Let me say, something came up this week, in fact. A new prophet on the scene who's actually engendered a lot of enthusiasm among Catholics. So I postponed discussing the whole apocalyptic scenario, the prophetic end time scenarios that are out there, until next week, until I can check this particular person out and see if he's got anything new to offer. Always keep in mind the fundamental issue when people are talking about the end of the age is remember what Jesus told the apostles, that no man knows the hour or the time, and also when the apostles wanted to know exactly when he was going to restore the kingdom to Israel, he again put them off, saying, the Father has that information. So we'll come back and we'll deal with all those. I want to put a little more meat on the bones. But if you suspect that I'm not going to be packing off to Upper Montana to avoid coming collapse, you're right, I'm not. If Christ were coming back tomorrow, I'd still go out and plant a tree today. All right. See you next week.
I look forward to your answer to that question next week. And if you want to participate in Free Range Q&A, I encourage you, go to Facebook, go to Twitter, and you can email us. We want to hear from you. Al is not chicken in answering any of those questions, so make them hard. Thank you for joining us on this edition of Free Range Q&A. I'm Nick Tom, along with Al Kresta, and we'll see you next week.